All right, hello everyone. My name is Alexander Thompson. I'm going over the 2022 Brian Koberger case because I believe that this is a good example of how DNA evidence can link a suspect to a crime scene. For those who don't know, the University of Idaho murders was a quadruple homicide where four students were murdered in their off-campus home, and the likely targets were the three women living there. So the crime occurred on November 9th, 2022 in Moscow, Idaho, near the University of Idaho campus. Unfortunately, four students were murdered in their off-campus residence, making this a tragic quadruple homicide. Near the beginning of the investigation, law enforcement and investigators had very little to work with, including limited eyewitnesses. There was no immediate suspect. There was a complex crime scene they were working with, especially with four victims. Due to this, forensic evidence was going to be necessary for identifying who the perpetrator was and creating a case. The initial suspect in this case was Brian Koberger because a white Hyundai Elantra was found in surveillance footage in the area where the crime scene partook. And that vehicle was later traced back to Koberger, raising significant suspicion around him, which focused the investigation on him. The victims were four University of Idaho students: Maddie Cox, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. They all lived in the same residence and were tragically killed during a single violent attack, and their deaths had a major impact on the surrounding community. They didn't have a lot to work with at the beginning. DNA evidence was going to be incredibly crucial for this case. I don't think there would have been a charge without it. Luckily, they did find pretty condemning DNA evidence. And for that evidence, investigators found DNA on the button snap of a knife sheath that was recovered at the crime scene. This DNA was later compared to Brian Koberger's DNA and was determined to be a match. This directly connected him to an object left inside the house, which is a pretty strong form of physical evidence and scientific evidence that placed him at the scene rather than near it. For the footprint evidence, latent shoe prints were discovered, and latent shoe prints, different than like soft shoe prints, like a step in the mud or sand. Latent shoe prints are shoe prints that are found and discovered through powdering or a chemical mix. But anyways, the pattern and the size of the prints were consistent with a type of shoe that was linked to Koberger. So footprints alone aren't necessarily enough to identify a specific person. They narrowed it down to Koberger, which made the DNA evidence stronger. For this case, it seems that the collection and analysis process was done properly. There was no mismanagement or anything. They collected the DNA by swabbing the button snap of the knife sheath at the crime scene where they found the DNA evidence. This sample was preserved, the contamination was prevented, then it was sent to a forensic laboratory, and in that lab, the DNA profile was developed, compared to known DNA profiles, and attached to Brian Koberger. So, when basically his DNA was tested, it matched the sample from the sheath and provided a direct link. For the shoe print, investigators noticed these footprints, photographed them, and whatnot. Then they used like powder or chemical techniques to enhance the prints so the pattern could be seen clearly. When the analyst examined the size, the tread pattern, and whatnot, they compared it to shoes that were connected to Koberger, and the similarities helped support that the footprints were consistent with shoes that he wore. All right, so sorry for the lengthy, bulky slide here. Um, since the DNA evidence was so crucial in this case, I felt that it was important to show how the evidence linked to Koberger, um, and how it basically got narrowed down to where it could only be him. And this is how it played out via DNA. The forensic evidence was crucial in linking someone to the case because of the lack of evidence at the beginning. And since Brian Koberger was already a suspect, when they found DNA at the location that matched him, they followed this trail. So, the strongest piece of evidence was that single source DNA found on the button snap of the knife sheath. And using the STR DNA comparison, they matched his profile with an extremely high level of statistical certainty, which practically placed him at the scene without a shadow of a doubt. To add to that, they found the shoe print consistent with a type of shoe that he wore, which supported the fact that he was there, because the shoe print alone couldn't prove that he was there. It just supported the fact that it made the DNA stronger, basically. The evidence also ruled out anyone else that it could be, especially since the DNA comparison made it almost certain that he was there. There were unidentified males that were at the crime scene, but none of these matched anyone in criminal databases or and there was no DNA on any other critical piece of evidence except for Koberger's. So they eliminated other people that it could potentially be because of how condemning the DNA evidence was towards Koberger on these pieces of evidence. And the DNA was further narrowed through forensic genealogy, and the DNA from the sheath was used to build a family tree, which led the investigators to Koberger. So when they believed it was Koberger, that's how they got the warrant. And they got a cheek swab from him, matching the DNA sample. The cheek swab DNA sample matched the sheath DNA sample, confirming their suspicions that he was there. So now there's not a chance that he was there, or extremely likely, he was definitely there. So after absolutely confirming he was there, a crucial piece of evidence linked him to the crime, the knife sheath, as well as the footprints, and that further linking him to it. He did eventually take a guilty plea deal because there was no way around it. He was definitely guilty, since he was definitely there with the murder weapon. By accepting the guilty plea deal, his goal was to avoid the death sentence, and he avoided the lengthy courtroom process. He was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole, which means he will spend the rest of his life in prison, justifiably so. The DNA evidence played the primary role in this because without it, there would be no charge. The DNA found on the knife sheath, the shoe print evidence, combined with that suspicion from the very beginning due to his car being at the scene, created an absolutely scientifically reliable source that linked Koberger to the crime scene. Since the evidence was so strong, there was no way the defense could challenge this, which is why Koberger chose to plead guilty. You guys for watching. Here are my sources that I used. I hope that this gave you a better understanding of the Koberger case, and I hope you enjoyed.